My name is Emma Carter, and if there's one thing I've learned in 34 years, it's that the people who love you can still break your heart. Sometimes they don't even realize they're doing it. Other times, they know exactly what they're doing. Looking back now, I can honestly say I wasn't surprised when my parents showed up at my front door crying. I wasn't happy about it. I wasn't proud of being right, but I wasn't surprised, because for months I had begged them not to make the biggest mistake of their lives, and they chose my younger brother over me anyway. If you've ever been the child who was expected to understand while someone else was allowed to make every mistake imaginable, then you'll understand exactly how this story begins. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. Our neighborhood was quiet, tree-lined streets, kids riding bicycles until the streetlights came on, summer barbecues, block parties, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. From the outside, my family looked perfect. My dad, Richard Carter, worked as an electrician for over 40 years. He believed in hard work, honesty, and never spending money you didn't have. My mom, Linda, managed a local bookstore. She was warm, generous, and the kind of woman who baked cookies for every new family that moved into the neighborhood. People loved my parents. So did I. That's what made everything hurt so much, because somewhere along the way, my younger brother Ryan became the center of their universe. Ryan was 4 years younger than me. He had an answer for everything, a joke for every situation. He could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 10 new friends. People called him charismatic. I called him convincing. Those are two very different things. When Ryan forgot to do his homework, teachers heard excuses. When I forgot mine once, Dad grounded me for a week. When Ryan crashed Dad's truck during high school, Mom said, "At least he's okay." When I dented Mom's car backing out of the driveway, Dad made me pay every cent for the repairs. I told myself life wasn't fair. I accepted it, because that's what older siblings do, or at least that's what I believed. After college, I became a registered nurse. The work wasn't glamorous. Long hours, night shifts, missed holidays, exhaustion that settled into your bones. But I loved helping people, and for the first time in my life, I felt appreciated. Around the same time, I met Daniel. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. He worked as a structural engineer and somehow made bridges sound fascinating. More importantly, he listened, really listened. One Sunday, after another uncomfortable family dinner, we were driving home when he finally asked the question I'd spent years avoiding. "Emma, can I ask you something?" I looked over. "Sure." "Why do you keep trying so hard?" "What do you mean?" He kept his eyes on the road. "Your parents, they barely notice anything you do. You drove 2 hours today just to fix your dad's porch. Ryan showed up 40 minutes late. He didn't bring anything. He left before dessert, and somehow they thanked him more than they thanked you." I laughed quietly, not because it was funny, because hearing someone else say it out loud made it impossible to ignore. "They love us both," I said. Daniel didn't argue. He simply reached across the center console and held my hand. Sometimes silence tells you more than words ever could. A year later, we got married. My parents came. Ryan was the best man. During his speech, he joked that I'd finally found someone willing to tolerate how serious I was. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, because pretending had become second nature. Life settled into a comfortable routine. Daniel and I bought a modest home, nothing extravagant, 3 bedrooms, a small backyard, a wraparound porch I'd always dreamed about. Every month we saved a little more money. Every month my parents talked a little more about retirement. Dad had earned it. 42 years climbing ladders, working in freezing winters, sweating through scorching summers. His hands were rough from decades of work. Mom had quietly saved every extra dollar she could. By the time they retired, they had built nearly $700,000 in retirement savings. Not enough to be wealthy, more than enough to live comfortably. I remember the dinner when Dad announced his retirement. He looked happier than I'd seen him in years. Mom cried. Daniel opened a bottle of champagne. For one beautiful evening, everything felt peaceful. Then Ryan stood up. "I've got some exciting news." The moment those words left his mouth, I felt my stomach tighten, because whenever Ryan had exciting news, someone else usually ended up paying for it. Ryan waited until everyone had finished celebrating before placing a sleek black folder on the dining table. He smiled the way magicians smile right before revealing their final trick. "I've been working on something for almost a year, and I think this could change all our lives." Dad leaned back in his chair, clearly interested. "What kind of business?" Ryan slid several printed pages across the table. Luxury vacation rentals, high-end cabins, lakefront homes, mountain retreats. He had charts showing rental income, graphs predicting growth, photos of beautiful properties in Tennessee and North Carolina. Everything looked polished, professional, too professional. "I've already found investors," Ryan continued confidently. "They're ready to come in, but they want to see that I'm financially committed first." Mom looked impressed. "How much you would need?" Ryan hesitated just long enough to make it seem uncomfortable. "About $500,000. The room fell silent. Even Daniel stopped eating. Dad slowly set his fork down. "Ryan, that's almost everything we have." Ryan nodded. "I know, but you're not giving it away. It's an investment. You'll own 30% of the company. In 2 years, you'll have more money than you've ever imagined." Dad rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't know." Ryan immediately leaned closer. "Dad, you've worked your whole life. Don't you deserve more than just surviving retirement?" Mom looked at Dad with hopeful eyes. "I mean, it does sound like an opportunity." I finally spoke. "Have you talked to a financial advisor?" Ryan looked at me. "No." "A lawyer?" "No." "An accountant?" "No." "Has anyone outside this room reviewed this business plan?" He laughed. "There she goes, always suspicious. I'm asking reasonable questions. So am I." He smiled. "Do you know what the biggest difference is between successful people and average people?" I already knew where this was going. They recognize opportunities. They don't spend their lives afraid. Daniel calmly interrupted. there's nothing wrong with asking for professional advice before investing $500,000. Ryan smirked. I didn't realize you were an investment expert. I'm not, but I know enough not to gamble someone else's retirement. The atmosphere instantly changed. Mom sighed loudly. Can we please have one dinner without arguing? I'm not arguing. I'm trying to protect you. Ryan folded his arms. No, you're trying to control everything. You've always hated that people believe in me. That one sentence completely shifted the room. Suddenly, I wasn't the concerned daughter anymore. I was the jealous older sister, exactly where Ryan wanted me. Dad stood up. I think we should sleep on it. Ryan nodded respectfully. Of course. I'd never pressure you. But as Daniel and I drove home later that night, he quietly said something I never forgot. He already knows they're going to say yes. I stared through the passenger window. What makes you think that? Because he wasn't asking. He was closing the sale. 3 weeks later, my phone rang while I was finishing a 12-hour shift at Riverside Methodist Hospital. Mom sounded happier than I'd heard in years. We did it. I froze. Did what? We invested with Ryan. My heart sank. How much? $520,000. I leaned against the nurse's station. You gave him over $500,000. It's not giving, it's investing. Mom, Ryan says we'll double it. Did you have anyone review the contracts? There was a pause. No. You signed legal documents without an attorney. Emma. Her voice became firm. You need to stop treating your brother like he's a criminal. I'm treating this like it's $500,000. That's because you don't believe in him. No, I don't believe in blind trust. She sighed. I knew you'd react like this. Then she hung up. I stood there staring at my phone. A coworker walked past and asked if I was okay. I smiled. I'm fine. It was the same lie I'd been telling myself for years. The next few months were almost unbearable. Every Sunday dinner became another presentation. Ryan suddenly wore expensive watches, designer clothes. He traded in his old SUV for a brand-new black Range Rover. When Dad asked where the money came from, Ryan simply smiled. Business is good. No financial reports, no paperwork, just confidence. Mom believed every word. Dad wanted to believe. I wanted proof. One afternoon, Ryan invited everyone to what he called the first company celebration. He rented the private room of an upscale steakhouse downtown. Everything looked expensive. Champagne, live music, perfectly dressed servers. He stood to give a toast. To family, the people who believed in me. Everyone applauded. I noticed he never once mentioned investors, employees, clients, only family. As dessert arrived, I excused myself to the restroom. On my way back, I heard Ryan talking on the phone near the emergency exit. No, they still think the Tennessee property closes next month. He laughed. I know, as long as they keep believing the paperwork. I stopped walking. I'll be in Miami next week. Yeah, they'll never know. My heart started racing. Before I could hear anything else, he turned around. Our eyes met. For a split second, the smile disappeared from his face. Then it came right back. Emma, you look like you've seen a ghost. I forced a smile. I was just looking for the restroom. He stared at me for a few uncomfortable seconds, then he smiled again. Careful, eavesdropping usually leads to misunderstandings. I nodded, but deep inside I knew something was terribly wrong. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying that conversation over and over in my head. The next morning I made a decision. If my parents wouldn't protect themselves, I would, even if they hated me for it. The following Monday was my day off. Most people would have spent it sleeping in after working 3 consecutive 12-hour shifts. Instead, I sat at my dining room table with my laptop open, a notebook beside me, and a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Ryan walked in, looked at the pile of papers, and sighed. "You're really doing this?" I looked up. "If I'm wrong, I'll apologize to Ryan. And if you're right." I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The first thing I searched for was Ryan's company. According to the glossy brochure he had proudly handed my parents, the business was called Blue Summit Retreats LLC. It sounded legitimate, professional, exactly the kind of name investors would trust. Except nothing came up. No company registration, no state business records, no professional website, no verified address. Nothing. I frowned and searched again. Still nothing. I checked Tennessee, North Carolina, Ohio, Florida. Nothing. My stomach tightened. Surely there had to be an explanation. Maybe the paperwork hadn't been processed yet. Maybe he'd registered under another name. I wanted to believe that. I truly did. Daniel came home just after lunch. Without saying a word, I turned the laptop toward him. He read the screen quietly, then looked at me. "You've searched every state." I nodded. "Twice." He pulled out his phone. "I know someone. My college roommate became a corporate attorney. He can tell us if we're missing something." For the first time that day, I felt a tiny bit hopeful. 2 days later, Daniel's friend called. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. When Daniel hung up, he looked pale. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "There is no Blue Summit Retreats." "What?" "The paperwork your parents signed was never filed." I stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means," he hesitated, "legally speaking, they didn't invest in a registered business." My heart pounded. "So where did the money go?" He looked me straight in the eyes. "To Ryan." I drove to my parents' house that evening. Dad answered the door with a smile. "Emma, what a surprise." I walked inside. "We need to talk." Mom immediately sensed something was wrong. "What happened?" I laid the documents on the dining table. "I checked Ryan's company." Dad smiled. "Good. Now you'll finally stop worrying." I swallowed hard. "There isn't one." The room became silent. Mom laughed nervously. "What do you mean?" "I mean Blue Summit Retreats doesn't exist." Dad frowned. "That's impossible. I checked every state. I even had an attorney review it." Mom shook her head. No, Ryan showed us paperwork." "I know, but it isn't registered." Dad pushed the papers away. "You must have made a mistake." "I wish I had." Mom folded her arms. "I can't believe you do this." I blinked. "Do what?" "Try to destroy your brother." For a moment, I couldn't even speak. "I'm coming here because I'm trying to protect you. By accusing your own brother, I'm showing you facts." "Facts?" Mom snapped.
The only fact I see is that you've never wanted Ryan to succeed. Dad stood up. I think you should leave. I looked at him in disbelief. Dad, leave. His voice was calm, but firm. Daniel gently touched my arm. We should go. As we reached the front door, Mom said something I'll never forget. If you can't be happy for your brother, don't come back until you can. The drive home was completely silent. Halfway there, I finally broke down. Not because they'd thrown me out, not because they believed Ryan, but because I realized something. For years, I'd been trying to earn a place in a family that had already decided where I belonged, and it wasn't beside them. 3 months passed, no phone calls, no Sunday dinners, no birthday invitations, nothing. It hurt, more than I expected, but life went on. I focused on work. Daniel and I celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary. We planted flowers in the backyard. We even talked about starting a family. Slowly, the pain became quieter, until one rainy Thursday evening. I'd just finished making dinner when someone knocked on the front door. 3 slow knocks. Daniel looked through the window, then turned toward me. Emma. His expression changed. It's your parents. I opened the door. For a second, I almost didn't recognize them. Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years. His shoulders were slumped. His clothes were wrinkled. Mom's eyes were swollen from crying. Neither of them spoke. Then,
My father whispered 5 words I never thought I'd hear. You were right. And with those words, everything changed. Emma. That was all my father could manage before his voice cracked. For the first time in my life, the strongest man I had ever known looked completely defeated. I stepped aside. Come in. Neither of them moved. Mom kept her eyes on the porch floor. I don't think we deserve to. Those words caught me off guard. For years, I had imagined what this moment might feel like. I thought I'd be angry. I thought I'd remind them of every time they chose Ryan over me. I thought I'd make them apologize before I even opened the door. Instead, all I saw were 2 broken people. Please, I said quietly. It's raining. They walked inside. Daniel greeted them warmly, just as he always had. No resentment, no sarcasm. He simply hung up their wet coats and asked if they'd like some coffee. Dad nodded. Mom couldn't stop crying. For nearly 5 minutes, nobody spoke. The only sound in the room was the rain tapping gently against the windows. Finally, Dad took a deep breath. He's gone. I already knew who he meant. When? Almost 6 weeks ago. I stayed silent. He emptied every account. He sold the condo. He sold the cars. He even took money from a line of credit we didn't know he'd opened using our house. I frowned. Our house? Dad nodded slowly. He convinced us to refinance. My stomach dropped. He said we needed extra capital to buy another property. Mom covered her face. We signed everything. We trusted him. I closed my eyes. The damage was worse than I had imagined. How much? Dad stared at the coffee cup in his hands. Everything. The retirement, the savings, the credit line, the emergency fund. We owe more than the house is worth. Daniel looked at me. I knew exactly what he was thinking. This wasn't just financial ruin. This was complete devastation. Dad continued. The bank starts foreclosure proceedings next month. Mom finally looked up. We've been staying in a motel. I blinked. A motel? Dad nodded. We couldn't keep up with the payments. They've already started the legal process." The room suddenly felt much smaller. This wasn't the comfortable retirement they had dreamed about. This wasn't even starting over. They had nothing. Not because life had been unfair, not because of bad luck, because they had trusted the wrong person. Dad reached into his jacket pocket and removed an old envelope. Inside were several photographs. He slid them across the table. Someone mailed these anonymously. I picked them up. Ryan standing beside a luxury yacht. Ryan holding champagne in front of a Breach Bank villa. Ryan smiling beside a brand new Ferrari. Another picture showed him with a woman I had never seen before. None of the photos looked recent. They all looked happy, while my parents had been packing boxes and moving into a motel. Daniel quietly asked, "Have the police found him?" Dad shook his head. "The FBI says they believe he left the country. The money passed through several accounts before disappearing. They're investigating, but—" his voice faded. "They don't know if we'll ever recover anything." Mom started crying again. "I still don't understand. Why would he do this to us?" That question stayed in the air for several seconds. Finally, I answered honestly, "Because nobody ever told him no." Both of them looked at me, not defensively, not angrily, simply listening. "For 30 years, I continued gently, Ryan learned that someone else would always fix his mistakes. When he failed a class, you blamed the teacher. When he wrecked Dad's truck, you bought another one. When he maxed out his first credit card, you paid it off. When he quit 3 jobs in 1 year, you said he just hadn't found his passion." I wasn't trying to hurt them. I was telling the truth. The first time he asked for $500,000, he genuinely believed you'd give it to him. Dad slowly lowered his head. "I know. I see that now." Mom whispered through tears, "We didn't lose our money because Ryan tricked us. We lost it because we refused to believe you." Those words hit harder than any apology ever could. For years I'd wanted them to admit what had happened. Now that they had, it didn't feel satisfying. It just felt sad. Dad looked around our living room. It wasn't luxurious. The furniture was simple. The walls held framed family photos from vacations Daniel and I had saved years to afford. Everything in this house represented patience, discipline, sacrifice. Dad smiled sadly. "You built this. We're so proud of you." I almost laughed. Those were the words I'd wanted to hear since I was a little girl, but somehow hearing them now only reminded me how many years had passed without them. "I wish you'd told me that before." Dad nodded. "So do I." Silence filled the room again. Then Mom reached across the table and took my hand. It was the first time she'd done that in years. The little girl inside me wanted to throw my arms around her. The grown woman in me remembered every ignored birthday, every comparison, every time I'd been told to understand. Forgiveness wasn't something that happened in a single conversation. Trust wasn't rebuilt overnight, but neither was it impossible. I squeezed her hand very gently. "I'm willing to try." Mom burst into tears. Dad quietly wiped his eyes. Daniel smiled without saying a word. For the first time in many years, it didn't feel like we were pretending to be a family. It felt like we were finally becoming one. The next few weeks were unlike anything I had expected. My parents didn't ask me for money. They didn't ask to move into our house. They didn't ask me to fix the mess Ryan had created.
Instead, they showed up every Saturday morning. Dad helped Daniel repair the backyard fence that we'd been putting off for months. Mom planted flowers with me in the front garden. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we didn't. It was awkward, but it was honest. For the first time in years, there were no comparisons, no excuses for Ryan, no lectures about why I should understand. Just quiet moments between people trying to rebuild something they had nearly destroyed. One evening, Dad handed me an old photo album. I found this while packing. As I flipped through it, I found pictures of birthday parties, school plays, camping trips, and then I noticed something. There were dozens of photos of Ryan, only a handful of me. Dad noticed one expression. I never realized. What? How invisible you made us feel. He shook his head. I can't change those years, but if I could, I would. For the first time in my life, I believed him. A month later, I received a call from Detective Harris. He was part of the financial crimes unit handling Ryan's case. Miss Carter? Yes. We've located your brother. I nearly dropped my phone. You found him? He was detained while trying to enter Canada using false identification. I sat down slowly. So, he's coming back? Yes. Federal charges have been filed. My heart started racing. After everything, after months of wondering, Ryan was finally coming home, just not in the way he'd imagined. 3 months later, the trial began. The courtroom was quieter than I expected. Ryan looked different. His expensive suits were gone. The confidence he'd carried his entire life had disappeared. For the first time, he looked afraid. When he saw me sitting beside our parents, his eyes widened. He genuinely seemed surprised that we were together. His attorney argued that Ryan had intended to repay the money. The prosecutors presented bank records, luxury purchases, international transfers, fake companies, forged signatures, hidden accounts. The evidence was overwhelming. Then they called my father to testify. Dad slowly walked to the witness stand. He looked at Ryan for several seconds before speaking. I trusted my son. I believed every word he said. I spent 42 years climbing ladders, working weekends, missing birthdays. I wasn't trying to become rich. I was trying to make sure my wife and I would never become a burden to our children. He paused. But the child I spent my life protecting became the one I needed protection from. The courtroom became completely silent. Even Ryan lowered his head. Then my mother testified. She cried through most of it. I thought loving him meant rescuing him. I know now I wasn't loving him. I was teaching him that actions don't have consequences. Finally, it was my turn. The prosecutor asked one simple question. Miss Carter, when did you realize something was wrong? I looked at Ryan, then answered. The day my parents trusted him more than they trusted the truth. That was all I said. I didn't need to say anything else. The documents spoke for themselves. 2 days later, the jury returned. Guilty on every count. Wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, financial exploitation. Ryan was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. As deputies escorted him away, he turned toward us. For a moment, I thought he might apologize. Instead, he simply said, "This is your fault." I almost laughed. Even now, after everything, he still believed someone else was responsible for his choices. That was the tragedy. Not the prison sentence, not the stolen money, not even the family he'd destroyed. The tragedy was that Ryan had spent his entire life being rescued, so he never learned how to take responsibility. Over the next year, life slowly found its rhythm again. The government recovered a small portion of the stolen money after selling Ryan's remaining assets. It wasn't much, nowhere near what my parents had lost, but it helped them avoid foreclosure. They moved into a small apartment only 15 minutes from our house. Every Sunday evening became family dinner, not because anyone expected it, because everyone wanted it. Sometimes Dad cooked, sometimes Daniel grilled in the backyard. Mum always brought dessert. There was one empty chair at the table. No one talked about it, no one needed to. One autumn afternoon, as I helped Dad hang bird feeders in his tiny backyard, he suddenly stopped what he was doing. "Emma, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you help us?" I smiled. "What do you mean?" "After everything, the favoritism, the way we treated you, you had every reason to walk away." I looked across the yard, where Mum was laughing with Daniel over something neither of them could seem to get right. Then I looked back at Dad. Because someone had to end the cycle. He frowned slightly. "What cycle?" "The one where pride matters more than people. The one where being right is more important than doing what's right. If I'd abandoned you, I would have become exactly what all those years of hurt were trying to turn me into." He nodded slowly. "I never thought of it that way." "I know." We stood there in comfortable silence. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. For the first time since I was a little girl, I didn't feel like the forgotten daughter. I felt seen. Not because my parents had finally admitted they were wrong, but because I had stopped measuring my worth by whether they noticed me. Sometimes justice isn't watching the people who hurt you lose everything. Sometimes justice is realizing they no longer have the power to define who you are. And sometimes the greatest inheritance you'll ever receive isn't money. It's the peace that comes from knowing you chose kindness when bitterness would have been easier. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or forgotten by the people you loved most, remember this: your value has never depended on someone else's ability to see it. Sometimes the hidden truth is that you've been enough all along. Thank you for listening to Hidden Truth Chronicles. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more unforgettable stories of family, betrayal, redemption, and the truths that always find their way into the light. Until next time, take care of yourself and never stop believing that the truth has a way of revealing itself.